yelling out the instructions to them. Do this, do that. So he wrote over to the leader and said, why aren't you working with the other men? The leader looked up and said, sir, I am a corporal. That's the work for privates to do, not for a corporal to do. And the man on the horse said, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how important you were. Without another word, he got off his horse and tied it to a tree, took off his coat. And he got down in the ditch and dug with the other soldiers. He worked up a sweat. He worked till he was dirty and exhausted, and his hands were blistered. When the work was done, he got out of the ditch, put his coat on, and got up on his horse again. He spoke to the leader. He said, Mr. Corporal, the next time you have a task for the men to do that you don't think you're worthy of doing, that you think you're too good to do yourself, you call me and I'll come and help them. Corporal said, thank you, sir. What is your name so I know who to call? And the tall rider looked at him and said, Washington. My name is General George Washington. Now, it's reported that during the Revolutionary War, the soldiers, most of them, loved George Washington. He was right down there in the trenches with them. In the winter of Valley Forge, he was suffering in the cold as well. He was eating rations that were not much better than the lowest private. There are, it turns out, only two kinds of leaders really, aren't there? There are pushers and pullers. I'm condensing a wealth of graduate school into those two words. There are pushers and there are pullers. There are pushers, leaders who sit back and say, do this and do that. I'll stay here in my comfort. I won't get my hands dirty. But you do the work. And there are pullers. Ones who say, follow me. Do as I do. And they lead by example. The best of our human leaders are those who lead by example. They're the ones we follow most closely and most fervently. But none of them, even the best of us, can't hold a candle to the ultimate leader, the one who is the example of all leadership, Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Just as we hear in our gospel reading tonight, he came to serve others. He came to sacrifice himself for others. And he calls us to follow him. This is a hard calling for us. We heard the account of this Last Supper in all the other Gospels. And there are details that each of the other Gospels give. We know, for example, that when they got to the upper room that night, they were reclining at the table. They didn't sit at the table, despite Da Vinci's good painting. I like that painting, but it's not accurate. They reclined at table, if you're paying attention to the words tonight, laying on sofas or divans, their heads into the table, their feet out to the outer edge of the room, dipping pieces of bread into sauces, maybe with a pinch of meat here and there. And as they were eating, Jesus, their leader, got up. Imagine looking on as he stood, and he took off his garments. Only slaves did that, by the way. In the ancient world, slaves often went naked because there were no consequence. They weren't really people. He took off his garment like the lowliest slave. He put on a towel around his waist like the lowliest slave. And he got a basin of water. He started going around the table, washing the feet of the people who followed him like the lowliest slave. We always hear about Peter at this time in most of the readings on this Maunday Thursday. Peter objected. Lord, I'm not worthy. Lord, I'm not worthy of you washing my feet. Peter, I have to wash your feet if you're going to be part of what is to come. Well, don't wash my feet, then wash all of me, Peter says elsewhere. Jesus said, no, only your feet. The most humbling and humiliating part of you. We always hear about Peter, but let's remember the others who were there that night also, getting their feet washed as well. There was Andrew, there was Matthew, there was James and John, there was Philip and Thomas. And in John's gospel, there's also Judas Iscariot. By the time they sat down for the meal, Judas had already betrayed Jesus. He'd gone to the temple leaders and given up that he'd be at the Garden of Gethsemane. He'd agreed on a price. He'd sold out the rabbi. Jesus knew this. He knew who had done this, but he still washed his feet. He still gave him a chance for grace and cleansing. He humbled himself even to those who despised him and betrayed him. Only a real leader would do that. Only someone who's going to show us an example of not just love, but a radical love. That's exactly what he showed. Radical love. And a few hours later, when he was arrested, and when he was beaten, and when he was tortured, when he was nailed to the cross, as he cleansed the feet of those who followed him, he cleansed the sins of those who followed him by his blood flowing down that coarse, hard wood. He was an example of love. And for us, there's this knowledge tonight. It's not enough just to look at him and say, wasn't he wonderful? He was. If we remember this night, we received 3 commandments. 3 commandments. That we eat the bread, his body, that we drink the wine, his blood, and that we love one another as he loved us. That's what he expects of us. That's what he calls us to do. About 30 years ago now in Phoenix, Arizona, Mother Teresa came for a visit. Mother Teresa, the living saint, and she was a wonderful woman, apparently. She came to Phoenix to open up a homeless shelter the organization was starting. And all the press in the city wanted to get coverage of her, so she was doing interview after interview. She went to the biggest radio station in Phoenix, and she was interviewed on air. When it was over, after they were off the air, the microphones were turned off, the commentator said to her, "Mother, is there anything else I can do for you?" What he meant was, can I get you a glass of water? Would you like to use the restroom before you go? Do you want me to publicize what you're doing a little bit more? But she was a follower of Christ, you see. She had one thing in her mind above all else, and so she looked him in the eye. Can you imagine what he felt? She said, "Yes, there is something you can do for me. Go and find somebody that nobody loves, and you love them." This is Maunday Thursday. Maunday is an old word that's taken from an ancient Latin word called mandatum. It means command. We remember this night that God, Jesus, the Son of the living Lord, gives us 3 commands. To eat his body and the bread, because each time we eat his body and the bread, he becomes one with us and we again become one with him. And to drink his blood in the wine, because each time we drink his blood in the wine, we experience his forgiveness again, his cleansing of our souls. And the 3rd commandment, that we love one another, not as we love, but as he has loved us, that we love one another. Let's give thanks for his vision for us. As we enter into these 3 days, as he sacrificed himself for us, let us remember his commands and his expectations for us, and his hopes for us, and his love for us. That's the message of this night.